It was August 15th, 1940, a grey, wind-swept morning over the North Sea. The operators at a coastal radar station near Wilhelmshaven leaned over their glowing screens, tracing the faint arcs of approaching aircraft. The signals were weak, uncertain, perhaps a flock of birds, perhaps weather interference, or perhaps something more. But inside the Luftwaffe command network, those early blips meant little. General Hugo Spell's staff believed the Royal Air Force was exhausted, crippled by weeks of bombardment. No one expected the British to strike so far so soon, so the warning was logged and ignored. Hours later, German airfields along the coast roared to life, not in preparation but in panic. Bombs fell where there should have been defense. British Spitfires, guided by unseen signals, had slipped past the complacent German watch. It was a moment that symbolized an entire failure of perception, the quiet war of radar, invisible, underestimated, and devastating in its effect. As smoke rose over the runways, few German commanders yet understood what had happened. For them, radar was still a tool of minor significance, a curiosity of technicians, not a weapon of war. Yet in the unseen world of electromagnetic waves, the British had built a shield that changed everything. To understand how the Luftwaffe came to ignore the very warnings that could have saved them, we must return to the years before the sky filled with fire, to a time when radar was just a whisper in the scientific world, and no one imagined it could decide the fate of nations. The 1930s were years of transformation and tension. Across Europe, the shadow of another great war lengthened, and every nation searched for a weapon that might guarantee survival. In laboratories and workshops, engineers experimented with the invisible. Radio waves, magnetic fields, the very fabric of the air. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Detect an approaching aircraft not by eye or sound, but by the reflection of radio waves. Few understood it and fewer believed it could work. Germany's early research began under the Navy's physicist, Rudolf Kühnhold. By 1934, his team had already bounced radio waves off ships in the Bay of Kiel. Their crude apparatus, known as the Freya system, could detect aircraft more than 100 kilometers away. It was a scientific triumph, and yet within the military hierarchy it earned little respect. Hitler's focus lay elsewhere. The new Germany would dominate through steel and fire, not invisible signals. Tanks, dive bombers, and shock tactics. These were the tools of blitzkrieg, not fragile antennas spinning on the coast. The British, however, took a different path. Alarmed by reports of German air rearmament, scientists under Sir Robert Watson-Watt began developing a nationwide warning network. While the Luftwaffe prepared for offense, Britain prepared for survival. Chain home stations began rising along the eastern coast, tall skeletal towers scanning the skies. It was the birth of the first integrated radar defense system in the world. Germany watched with curiosity, not fear. Goering dismissed the British program as scientific playthings. To his mind, no device could replace the instincts of a fighter pilot or the eyes of a seasoned observer. That arrogance would soon become fatal. As war drew nearer, the Freya network remained incomplete, scattered, and underused. The technology existed, but the doctrine did not. And so, when radar's invisible signals began to decide life and death in the air, Germany found itself blind not for lack of science, but for lack of belief. By the spring of 1940, while Europe burned under blitzkrieg, Britain was quietly weaving together a new kind of defense, one that relied not on walls or soldiers, but on the precision of radio waves and the discipline of coordination. Along the coast, from the cliffs of Dover to the shores of Scotland, rose tall steel masts strung with web-like antennas. They were known collectively as chain home, and to the untrained eye they looked harmless, even primitive. Yet these towers formed the backbone of the world's first integrated air defense system, a network capable of seeing an enemy hundreds of miles before it struck. Each station pulsed powerful electromagnetic signals into the sky, waiting for echoes from the metallic bodies of approaching aircraft. Those faint echoes, translated into lines on cathode ray tubes, were interpreted by skilled operators, mostly young women trained in patience and precision. The data traveled through phone lines to filter rooms, where officers plotted enemy movements on vast tables covered in transparent grids. From there, information flowed to Fighter Command headquarters, where Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding made his quiet, calculated decisions. Every scramble, every interception, every victory began here, not in the cockpit but in rooms filled with static and sweat. The system worked because it was human and technological at once, a perfect blend of science and structure. Radar told them where to look. Disciplined organization told them how to act. For the first time in military history, a nation could track the enemy's every move before a single bomb fell. Across the Channel, the Luftwaffe had nothing comparable. Göring's intelligence officers had noted the towers but assumed they were simple communication relays. German pilots joked about them, never realizing they were the eyes of Britain itself. When the Battle of Britain began, this misunderstanding would shape the entire course of the air war. The British would fight with foresight, the Germans with confidence. Only one would prove decisive. Inside Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin, confidence was treated as doctrine. The early victories in Poland, Norway and France had bred a sense of invincibility. The Luftwaffe was the sharp edge of Hitler's blitzkrieg, swift, coordinated and seemingly unstoppable. In the grand offices of the Air Ministry, walls were lined with maps of conquered cities, not with technical reports or research data. The generals trusted speed and discipline, not invisible waves and theories. When German radar operators at Freya stations reported strange signals from the English Channel, the responses were often dismissive. Instrument error, some officers said. Weather ghosts, said others. Those who insisted otherwise risked ridicule or worse. Göring's temper was legendary. He had once declared that no machine will ever replace the eyes of a fighter pilot. To question that was to question his leadership. Freya stations dotted along the coast could indeed detect aircraft, but they existed in isolation. There was no unified command chain, no nationwide plotting system. A radar station could see danger coming, but had no efficient way to warn the squadrons that would face it. Messages traveled through tangled lines of command, sometimes arriving too late, sometimes ignored entirely. Reports from field technicians about the potential of radar were buried in bureaucracy or dismissed by senior officers who believed victory was already assured. The arrogance that had once fueled Germany's lightning campaigns now blinded it to the changing nature of warfare. Meanwhile, across the Channel, British radar coverage tightened its grip. Every Freya station that failed to send an accurate warning, every commander who dismissed a blip as nothing, widened the gap. German pilots, once hunters, were about to become targets, their every move foreseen, tracked and countered. The seeds of disaster had already been planted, not by the enemy's bombs, but by their own disbelief. The air war that was about to begin would reveal just how costly that arrogance would become. July 10, 1940. The Luftwaffe launched its first large-scale offensive against Britain. The order from Göring was clear: cripple the Royal Air Force, destroy its airfields and break its spirit. The skies over the Channel filled with hundreds of aircraft, Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Heinkel bombers, Dornier formations stretching into the horizon. It was supposed to be a show of dominance, but within hours it became something else entirely. From the moment the German planes left their bases in France, they were being watched. British radar stations along the coast picked up the signals almost instantly. At Bentley Priory, the nerve center of fighter command, Dowding's team tracked each formation with eerie precision. The information flowed through the Dowding system like blood through arteries. Radar operators to filter rooms to group headquarters to fighter squadrons. By the time the first Luftwaffe bombers approached the English coast, Spitfires and Hurricanes were already climbing to meet them at the exact altitude and bearing. German pilots couldn't understand how the British always seemed to be waiting. Some believed their radio codes had been broken. Others thought spies were among them. But the truth was far simpler and far deadlier. The British had turned science into foresight. What the Luftwaffe dismissed as experimental electronics had become the most effective defensive weapon of the war. The first days of battle stunned the Germans. Expected to face a weakened RAF, they instead found relentless resistance. British pilots fought, landed, refueled, and rose again in perfect rhythm. Even when outnumbered, they always seemed to arrive at the right place, at the right time. Göring's staff blamed navigation errors, not radar. They adjusted flight routes, changed timings, and added escorts, but still the same result. The British interceptors appeared like ghosts, always knowing when and where to strike. By late July, Luftwaffe officers began whispering their doubts. Some reports from Freya operators indicated strange signal patterns correlating with RAF reactions, but no one dared to draw the conclusion. The Germans still believed their eyes and instincts could win. In the skies above them, the British had already proven otherwise. Deep beneath the estate of Bentley Priory, the true heart of Britain's air defence beat with quiet precision. The atmosphere inside was unlike any other command post of the war. No shouting, no chaos, only concentration. Along the walls, telephones buzzed, connecting radar stations, observer corps posts and fighter bases across the country. In the center of the room stood a vast table covered in transparent grids, where young women of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force moved colored blocks representing enemy and friendly formations. Above them, officers in uniform leaned over balcony rails, calculating interception courses and issuing commands. This was the Dowding system, a seamless blend of human intuition and technological innovation. When the chain home stations picked up echoes of incoming aircraft, those signals were immediately relayed through the system. Operators didn't know names or units. They worked on timing, bearing, and altitude. Within minutes, an entire picture of the sky appeared before commanders in near real time. It was modern warfare's first digital map, created by hand, guided by radar, and executed with deadly accuracy. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, reserved and methodical, had built this system against resistance and doubt. Many within the British establishment saw radar as untested science. Dowding saw it as survival. He believed that even if Britain's air fleet was smaller, superior information could balance the odds. History proved him right. When squadrons received the order to scramble, the pilots didn't know the source of their intelligence, only that it was precise. They trusted it, and it saved lives. The Germans, meanwhile, remained chained to outdated doctrines of visual detection and manual plotting. Their version of radar was fragmented, lacking communication with fighter control. They had the technology but not the architecture. As August 1940 intensified, the Luftwaffe's raids grew larger, yet Britain's defences grew sharper. Every bomb that failed to hit its target and every bomber that fell into the sea testified to the power of information over intimidation. The system worked not because it was perfect, but because it learned faster than the enemy. And while British radar stations hummed through the night, across the Channel, German command still refused to believe that such a network could exist. In laboratories tucked away behind barbed wire and blackout curtains, a handful of German scientists were beginning to realize the scale of what their commanders were ignoring. Among them was Dr. Hans Hollmann, one of Germany's earliest pioneers in microwave research. He and his colleagues, including Dr. Rudolf Kuhnhold and engineers from Gima, had already demonstrated radar's potential years earlier. They had built the Freya and Würzburg systems, capable of detecting aircraft at long distances with remarkable accuracy. But their success had one fatal flaw. It did not fit the Luftwaffe's vision of war. To Goering and his inner circle, radar was a defensive tool, and defense was not part of blitzkrieg. Their focus remained on fast-moving offensives, not stationary early warning systems. Hollmann's reports warning of British progress were quietly filed away. By mid-1940, fragments of intelligence reached Berlin indicating that the British were using radio-locating devices along their coast. Luftwaffe engineers intercepted the distinctive pulses of the chain-home network, proving its existence. Yet when presented to senior command, the data was dismissed. Goering scoffed, "The English are amateurs in electronics. They cannot see the sky with machines." It was arrogance disguised as certainty, a blindness reinforced by victory. Some officers tried to sound the alarm. Technicians from the occupied Channel Islands reported that British radar masts had guided fighter interceptions with uncanny precision. A few proposed targeted raids to destroy them. The idea was discussed, then dropped, considered a waste of resources. Instead, the Luftwaffe continued to bomb airfields and cities, never understanding that the real British weapon stood unguarded along the coast. Inside Germany's technical corps, frustration grew. Engineers knew their equipment could match the British, perhaps even surpass it, if only they were allowed to build and deploy it properly. But research budgets were cut in favor of aircraft production. By the time higher command realized radar's true potential, it was already too late. The scientists had seen the future. The generals had refused to believe it. The disconnect between intellect and authority was now complete. As the Battle of Britain reached its height, German innovation was smothered by pride, and the price would be paid in smoke and falling metal across the skies of southern England. It was a date the Luftwaffe would later call Der Schwarze Donnerstag, Black Thursday, August 15, 1940. Göring's long-awaited offensive, Adlertag, the Eagle Day, was meant to be the decisive strike that broke the RAF once and for all. Nearly 1,800 aircraft thundered into the air from occupied France, Norway and Belgium. German intelligence believed the RAF was down to its last few dozen fighters. The plan was bold, overwhelming and fatally misinformed. Before the first formations crossed the North Sea, Britain's chain home stations had already seen them. At 9:30 a.m., radar operators from Ventnor to Dover reported wave after wave approaching on multiple bearings. Within minutes, the information reached Fighter Command. Dowding's calm voice on the line ordered successive squadrons to scramble. Across southern England, the wail of air raid sirens merged with the rising roar of Merlin engines. Pilots climbed through clouds, guided by controllers who seemed to know exactly where the enemy would appear. At 10:20 a.m., the first bombers reached the coast and were met by interceptors already in perfect position. The Luftwaffe expected confusion. Instead, it found choreography. Dozens of dogfights erupted simultaneously across the Channel. Messerschmitts struggled to protect their bombers as Spitfires tore into the formations from above and Hurricanes from below. Within 2 hours, more than 70 German aircraft were downed. Pilots returning to base described British fighters appearing out of nowhere, always waiting, always prepared. They could not know that radar had guided every move. By afternoon, chaos spread. Luftwaffe Command tried to adjust flight paths, sending northern wings from Denmark and Norway to attack from unexpected angles. Yet Britain's radar coverage stretched farther than they imagined. Every detour, every surprise raid was seen long before it struck. When the day ended, the Luftwaffe had lost more aircraft than in any single operation of the war so far, nearly twice as many as the RAF. Göring was furious. He blamed his pilots, the weather, even fate, anything but the truth staring him in the face. The British had mastered the invisible battlefield. The myth of German air invincibility cracked that day. From this moment on, the Luftwaffe would never again hold unquestioned dominance in European skies, and yet within their command halls denial still reigned. In the aftermath of Eagle Day, the mood within Luftwaffe Command was grim but defiant. Göring refused to accept that Britain had outsmarted him technologically. He raged against his subordinates, demanding explanations that fit his narrative of superiority. The reports from radar technicians and field officers were ignored or rewritten. To admit that the British had built an unseen advantage was to admit failure at the highest level. And that was unthinkable. Yet the evidence could no longer be denied. Intercepted British transmissions revealed an organized defense system that operated with uncanny speed. Luftwaffe pilots reported again and again that the RAF always seemed to know their altitude, heading, and strength. Some described seeing the same patrols waiting at the same points day after day. It was too precise to be coincidence. Still, Göring clung to illusion. He ordered continued strikes on airfields and cities, convinced that pressure alone would break the British spirit. Instead, losses mounted. Between mid-August and early September, the Luftwaffe lost nearly 700 aircraft, a rate no air force could sustain. German ground crews worked through the night to repair what they could. Pilots, exhausted and disillusioned, began to doubt their leaders. The British, though battered, fought with new confidence. They had learned the rhythm of the attacks. Every radar echo meant precious minutes to prepare. Every interception a small victory bought with foresight. Captured German airmen were puzzled by their defeat. Many admitted they had underestimated British organization. "We thought they were lucky," one pilot recalled. "Now I know it wasn't luck. They saw us before we saw them." British intelligence quietly noted the comment. It confirmed what Dowding already knew, that the secret was still safe. By September, German losses forced a strategic shift. The Luftwaffe turned from airfields to civilian targets, beginning the Blitz, a campaign of terror meant to break morale rather than defense. Yet even as London burned, radar continued to function, and the RAF remained intact. Goering had traded strategy for vengeance. His arrogance had blinded him, and now his air force was bleeding. The price of disbelief was not just defeat in the air, it was the collapse of the illusion that technology could be ignored. The British had proven that wars would no longer be won by courage and firepower alone, but by information, coordination, and the will to listen to invisible warnings. By late 1940, Germany could no longer deny that radar had reshaped the air war. In response, scientists and engineers were ordered to develop countermeasures, a race to see what could not be seen. Laboratories across occupied Europe came alive with desperate innovation. The Luftwaffe's technical division, led by General Wolfgang Martini, began experimenting with ways to jam or deceive the British chain-home system. They called their effort Funkstörmaßnahmen, radio interference operations. Early attempts involved broadcasting powerful signals on the same frequencies used by British radar, hoping to drown out returning echoes. It worked briefly, but only at close range. The chain-home network's long wavelengths made it resilient, and the British operators quickly adapted. When direct jamming failed, German engineers turned to stealth. They experimented with radar-absorbing paints and even false formations of decoy aircraft, designed to confuse enemy plots. But the real countermeasure never came from technology alone. It came from intelligence. In 1941, German reconnaissance discovered the distinctive radar antennas along the coast. For the first time, they understood what those towers truly were. Plans were drawn to bomb them, but High Command again hesitated. Goering still doubted radar's importance, calling it a waste of bombs. The few attacks that were carried out damaged antennas, but never disabled the network. Within days, repairs restored full operation. Meanwhile, British scientists were already years ahead. They had miniaturized radar, placing it inside night fighters and even bombers. Airborne interception radar allowed pilots to hunt in the dark, guided by unseen eyes. In 1942, the invention of the cavity magnetron revolutionized radar entirely, making it compact and vastly more powerful. The Germans, still struggling with bulky transmitters, could not match it. Yet the radar duel went both ways. The Luftwaffe eventually fielded its own night defense network, known as Kammhuber Line, using Würzburg radar to track Allied bombers. It was formidable at first, but Allied scientists countered with window. Clouds of aluminum strips dropped from aircraft to blind radar screens. Once again, the cycle of innovation and adaptation favored those who had learned early to trust science. The war of machines had evolved beyond steel and fire. Invisible waves, mathematics, and imagination now dictated survival. Germany had finally entered the radar race, but it was chasing a ghost it had refused to believe in when it mattered most. The Battle of Britain ended not with a grand surrender, but with exhaustion for both sides. Yet in that weariness, history had been rewritten. Germany had failed to subdue Britain, not because it lacked courage or aircraft or men, but because it failed to understand the new language of war. The invisible world of radar had redrawn the battlefield, replacing speed with foresight, instinct with information. For the first time in military history, victory was determined by what could be seen before being seen. Inside British headquarters, the lessons were clear. Dowding's system had proven that technology, properly organized, could neutralize even a superior force. The coordination between radar stations, operations rooms, and squadrons had given the RAF a multiplying effect that no amount of German firepower could match. Every nation watching took notice. The United States, still neutral in 1940, sent delegations to study British radar. Within a year, they began constructing their own networks, from Pearl Harbor to the East Coast. Radar had become not merely a tool but a doctrine, a shield for modern civilization. In Germany, the realization came too late. When the Allies began their strategic bombing campaigns over Europe, the Luftwaffe found itself on the defensive, the position it had long scorned. Suddenly, radar became precious. The same commanders who once dismissed it now demanded more. New systems like Würzburg, Liechtenstein, and Freya were deployed across the Reich, but they were reactionary measures born of necessity, not vision. The Allied advance in radar, especially with the magnetron, had already pushed the science beyond reach. Captured German officers after the war would later admit the truth. "We had the technology," one said, but not the imagination to use it. It was a rare moment of candor in a war so often ruled by pride. The British victory in the air was not only a triumph of machines, it was proof that open minds and coordinated systems could defeat arrogance and fragmentation. The radar war was more than a clash of metal and men. It was a revolution in perception, a shift from reaction to prediction. Those who adapted survived. Those who refused to listen to the faint whispering warnings of their own instruments vanished from the skies. When the guns fell silent in 1945, the victors began sifting through the ruins of the Reich, searching not for treasure, but for truth. Among the captured documents and abandoned bunkers, Allied intelligence found what they had long suspected. Germany had possessed radar technology nearly equal to their own, years before the war's end. The Freya and Würzburg systems, carefully catalogued and tested, astonished even the scientists who examined them. The problem had never been invention. It had been indifference. Dozens of research reports from as early as 1937 detailed working detection systems capable of tracking aircraft and ships. Yet many of those files were stamped kein dringendes Interesse. No urgent interest. The words carried the weight of defeat. Interrogations of senior Luftwaffe staff revealed the rest. Operators had often detected British aircraft hours or minutes before major raids, only for their warnings to vanish into the bureaucratic maze of German command. Some messages were delayed by communications bottlenecks, others dismissed outright by officers, convinced the readings were errors. Dowding himself had reportedly laughed off one radar report during the Battle of Britain, saying, "Machines see ghosts." Those ghosts had become Spitfires, bombers, and ruin. For historians and scientists alike, the findings were haunting. The war had proven that leadership could destroy innovation as surely as enemy fire. Germany had built the tools to prevent its own downfall, then chosen not to use them. British analysts called it the blindness of certainty. They documented case after case of radar warnings ignored, commanders overruled, and opportunities lost. The irony was bitter. The same technological arrogance that had once driven Germany's early triumphs had now engineered its defeat. In the post-war years, radar knowledge spread rapidly. Former German engineers were recruited by both Allied and Soviet programs, their work fueling the Cold War's next generation of electronic warfare. Yet none forgot the lesson learned in 1940. Technology without trust, intelligence without humility, these were hollow victories. The captured documents were eventually filed under the title Luftwaffe Deficiencies in Signal Coordination. The report's conclusion was chillingly simple. Germany did not lose radar, it lost belief. In that loss lay the silent epitaph of a generation that mistook pride for strength, and in doing so, surrendered the skies they once ruled. The Battle of Britain was not just a struggle for territory or supremacy in the air, it was a conflict between two philosophies of war. One believed in force, the other in foresight. One trusted instinct, the other trusted information. In that clash, radar became more than a machine. It became the embodiment of modern warfare itself, invisible, intelligent, and relentless. When the first faint radar signals bounced off the wings of enemy bombers in 1940, few realized that the future of combat had changed forever. The age of courage alone was ending. From then on, the victors would be those who could see first, decide faster, and act smarter. Britain's triumph was not born from numbers or might, but from its willingness to listen, to scientists, to data, to the unseen. It was a triumph of trust in the quiet power of intellect over the noise of ego. Germany's failure, by contrast, was deeply human. It was not that its engineers lacked brilliance. Many were among the finest minds in Europe. It was that their warnings echoed in halls deafened by pride. The generals of the Luftwaffe had the tools to change the outcome of history, yet they dismissed them because they did not fit the image of war they understood. They had mastered the visible, formations, firepower, tactics, but not the invisible. And in modern warfare, it is the invisible that decides who lives and who falls. In the years that followed, radar became the foundation of every great military power. It guided bombers over Europe, ships across oceans, and eventually rockets into the stars. Yet its first victory was won not in destruction, but in detection. When a handful of British operators, watching the faintest green traces on their screens, helped a nation hold its ground. The story of radar is the story of humility and vision, of how those who dared to believe in what they could not see changed the destiny of nations. And for those who ignored the warnings, the lesson was written across the sky in smoke and silence. The Luftwaffe never recovered its dominance. Its downfall began not with defeat in battle, but with disbelief in its own science. In war, as in history, the faintest signal is often the one that matters most, if only someone is willing to listen.